National.
On Radio Islam International, and we now welcome on board Professor Sami al-Arian, Director for the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, or SIGA, at the Istanbul Zaim University, to talk about starvation, famine in Gaza, but more so the current progress relating to negotiations or lack of negotiations. Professor Sami, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Shukran for joining us and welcome.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I sincerely appreciate you coming on board with us this evening to be able to, dissect these particular issues. We've seen a kind of global groundswell over the past few days, particularly on the very dire issue of starvation. Allegedly, some movement on the ground in Gaza towards a few trucks entering, although the actual reality of that needs to be uncovered. If you could just perhaps update us on that. Where does that actually stand, and is that any positive movement in your opinion?
Well, since March 2nd, that's over 4 months now, 4.5 months, or even more than that, the Palestinians in Gaza have been under crippling siege, and no aid has entered, or very few aid has entered Gaza since. And that meant that 2 million people who have been under a genocide, who have been under a continuous assaults by the Israeli army, where every building has been targeted, have been destroyed, universities, schools, clinics, hospitals, public buildings, as well as 80% of the homes have been completely destroyed and others have been partially destroyed. And on top of this, they have been under starvation because no aid has been allowed, no medical assistance has been allowed. And that meant that the Palestinians have been dying slowly as tens of thousands have been killed through the bombing and through the genocide that Israel has perpetrated for over 21 months now. So with this, there has been an uproar throughout the world. We've seen how many activists, whether they are in the West or even in some of the Muslim countries, have been showing their anger, their frustration at the governments who have done nothing, absolutely nothing, to stop this genocide. We've seen now in the past few days, even people in Egypt. Egypt has been complicit in this genocide, has been complicit in preventing aid coming to the Rafah crossing. Thousands of trucks have been at the gate of the Rafah crossing, and they haven't been allowed to get in. And I wouldn't say just Egypt, because Israel, on the other hand, is not allowing, but also Egypt has been complicit in this situation. And we have seen that Egyptian youth have been calling for something to happen. So this kind of pressure eventually made the international community, or so-called international powers, particularly the United States and Israel, to move. And what we're seeing today in terms of these airdrops coming into some parts of Gaza is just a ruse. It's just a way to dissipate, to deflect the blame, and to dissipate this energy, this anger, this frustration that people have been sounding, because they know that Israel is not serious about lifting this starvation policy. Because had they been honest about it, they would have opened the Rafah crossing and thousands of aid trucks would have come into Gaza. Gaza is in need of massive aid, not just a few drops by some airplanes. We've seen how Israel has told the whole world what its objectives are. Its objectives basically is to depopulate Gaza, to make it unlivable so that Palestinians would be forced to leave Gaza. That is the ultimate plan for Israel. And to do that, they haven't been able to achieve this result through bombing and through genocide. So they're trying to add starvation on top of this in order to achieve that goal.
Would you say in everything that the Israelis are doing, Doctor, is there a cohesiveness in their plan? Has it been all these different ruses over time, as you've spoken about the latest airdrops. Has everything been a ruse, and have they been, consistently playing the international community, playing different players, but always keeping the, total depopulation of Gaza as the objective? Or, do they fail from time to time, and then just move on to a different strategy because of the necessities of the moment?
The Zionist regime uses whatever tools at its disposal in order to achieve its objectives. So, from that standpoint, it's haphazard, whatever is available to them. And they have no red lines. They are willing to cross whatever violations of the international standards and conventions and law that would allow them to achieve their objectives. And they haven't been able to do that so far. They wanted to annihilate, they wanted to eradicate, they wanted to end the resistance in Gaza, and they want to force the Palestinians to leave Gaza through whatever means available to them. And they haven't been able to do that. But at the same time, we've seen that there is a pressure. There's pressure is mounting. They told their partners in crime, the Americans who are complicit in what's going on, give us a few weeks, give us a few months. And these months became 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Now it's 21 months. Even we're coming into the 22nd months. And they haven't been able to achieve any of these objectives. Yes, they have been able to destroy Gaza, but they haven't been able to make the resistance surrender or raise the white flag. They haven't been able to compel the Palestinians to leave Gaza so that they can make room for them to reoccupy Gaza. The demographic problem that Israel has faced for decades now, they're trying to solve it by taking advantage of what happened on October 7th, trying to push the Palestinians out of Gaza, hoping that they can be successful and they can repeat it in the West Bank. Otherwise, what we have here is an apartheid regime. We have a regime that has two sets of laws. We have one group, the Jews, and that's how they call themselves, a Jewish state, being dominant over the other part, which are the Arabs, the Palestinians, Muslims, and Christians. And this kind of a setup is not only racist, and it's not only against any notion of justice, but it's also against what the world believes in. After the collapse of the apartheid regime in South Africa, no government, no state would stand up to this. But the problem here is that the United States, which has been hijacked by Zionist influence and Zionist forces within the United States, have been protecting the Israeli genocide, has been protecting what the Israelis are doing in Palestine. But that can't stay for long. We've seen now within even the American society, a lot of people, students, universities, academics, media people, social media influencers, and public persons, they have been talking and saying things that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. They have been standing up and saying loudly that this is not a policy, this is not something that they will stand for or have it done in their name. And that kind of reaction from very strong corners within the United States eventually is going to get the political leaders, either new political leaders elected or those who are in office today, to change course. Yes, the United States has not done much to alleviate what's happening. It's actually part of the problem. But with the American people now starting to speak out and speak up, things might change. And that's why they are panicking, and they're trying to use genocide as a tool in order to achieve their objectives.
I look at a post, a Facebook post from a few days ago. I just want to share with you the sentiment that was shared by the commenter, where he said that in Gaza, Israel is not negotiating, that for at least a year now, Israel hasn't been negotiating, nor is it interested in negotiations. All it does is buy time to entrench facts on the ground. Negotiations are merely a facade, a smokescreen to occupy the media and public opinion, while it quietly carves out and consolidates its political and settlement project on the ground. But then it goes on to discuss, is this a new tactic? Not at all. It has worked for the very same playbook that worked for 30 years under Oslo. And actually, the post, Doctor, is titled "Ross Left." referring to Dennis Ross, who was quite active in the Oslo period, and Witkoff arrived. I'm curious to get your opinion on this. Is it exactly like this, that the entire negotiations process is just to buy time?
For Israel, negotiations is just another tactic to achieve its goals. The Zionist movement, the Zionist regime, the Zionist ideology calls for depopulating the Palestinians from the historical land of Palestine and populate them with as many Jews within Palestine as possible. That has never wavered, that has never changed. Whatever it was called, a peace process, a political process, an Oslo process, it was just a means by which they wanted to achieve this goal of greater Israel. And we've seen after more than 3 decades, there hasn't ever been a notion that there will be a Palestinian state, or even a recognition that there will be a future Palestinian state, regardless of what it looks like. We've seen the number of settlers going from 125,000 back in 1993. Today, they're over 800,000. When this new government took over in early 2023, Smotrich, who's the finance minister and part and parcel of this Netanyahu fascist government, he says Palestinians have 3 options. Option 1, they need to recognize and acknowledge that this is a Jewish state, that they are not citizens, they have no political or civil rights, that they live here. If they live here in this country, they live at our behest. And if they don't like it, that they could be compensated and they can leave. And if not, the third option is death. When Netanyahu stood before the United Nations in September 2023, 15 days before October 7th, he drew a map in which there was no Palestine, it was all Israel. And he was touting how Israel is going to be the most important country in the region. The Zionist ideology and the Zionist regime has nothing, has given nothing, has no plans to have any kind of Palestinian state or a Palestinian even truncated entity. On the other hand, what we've seen since is that this very aggressive attempt to establish facts on the ground. So negotiations is only part of that tactic. If negotiations will further their goal of establishing greater Israel, they will use it. Now they have about 50 captives left, perhaps as much as 20 of them are alive. And what they're trying to do is, again, depopulate Gaza, make it unlivable, push the Palestinians out, expel them, at the same time retrieve or get back their captives. And to do that, they've been trying all kind of military means. Everything they tried has failed. So what they're trying to do now is to use negotiations. But let's look at the negotiations. Back on January 19th, there was a negotiated settlement, a negotiated agreement that was signed and even blessed by Trump himself. He pushed it before he took office, a day before he took office. In that agreement, there was supposed to be withdrawal to within 700 meters of the Gaza periphery, of the Gaza border, for the Israeli genocidal forces. And then the Palestinians would release certain captives. In return, the Israelis would release Palestinian prisoners. And in the meantime, this was supposed to go on for 60 days. There will be negotiations for the further release of the captives as well as the end of the war. What Israel did was to totally ignore this part and violated it. On March 2nd, they stopped all aid to the Palestinians, and on March 18th, they resumed the war. There was no negotiation, something that they have signed on, and then the Americans went along because Netanyahu convinced Trump, give us a few months, we'll be able to end it completely. We will kick out, we will eradicate, we will end the Hamas and the other Palestinian factions, and then we can do whatever we want, including, of course, forcing the Palestinians out. They failed. They failed miserably. So they had to come back to the negotiating table. Now, last week, there was a demand by the Israelis and the Americans for another 60 days in which they will negotiate the end of the war. They were demanding to be within 1,500 meters of the Gaza border. That meant that they will be in the middle of the residential areas. Even the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, refused that. So the Israelis revised that to 1,200 meters. That is still very close to the residential areas. So the resistance came back with a proposal, even though in the past, in the January agreement, it was 700 meters from the border. The resistance, Hamas and the other factions, said, okay, we'll go for 1,000 meters, which means they increased that to 300 meters. But if this 1,000 meters crosses into residential areas, then they have to go back to 800 meters, which is a very reasonable demand, because they don't want the Palestinians to be within the presence of Israeli occupation forces. And then they said, when it comes to aid, we're not going to sanction this American company that has been killing Palestinians when they go and try to get some aid. They've killed over 1,000 Palestinians so far. We need to go back to the protocol that we have agreed on, which is the United Nations has been administering since the early 1950s, UNRWA and other aid organizations, including the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. And we don't want to do anything with this particular pseudo organization, which is actually a security organization trying to control the Palestinians. That's again going back to the protocol that was signed back in January. And thirdly, when it comes to the exchange of prisoners, exchange of captives, the Israelis wanted to use the same ratio that the Palestinians used when they were releasing civilians. And everybody knew then that this is not going to be the same ratio. When you're talking about civilians, the ratio was 1 to 12. Israel wanted again 1 to 12 when it came to male soldiers. Everybody understood that this would be approximately 1 to 30. Now the resistance came and make a compromise and a concession. They said, okay, we can make it 1 to 20. And these three things, which are common sense, which have been accepted in the past, the United States and Israel said this is unacceptable, Hamas is being unreasonable, and then withdrew from the negotiations to put more political pressure, because they know that the Palestinians are under threat of death, either by hunger or by bombing. And in each case, we can't blame the victims. We have to know exactly who is doing what, who's doing the killing, and who's doing the starvation.
So, Professor, just to conclude, what could be a longer discussion, but just to conclude on this particular point, given the intransigence of the Israelis that you've just described and the Americans, number one, and again, you make that point, and I fully resonate with that. So I'm not asking it in that spirit, that we do not blame the victims, but what benefit is there for Hamas and the Palestinian factions to continue in these negotiations when it has been weaponized against them? And it also makes it difficult for them to face the Palestinian public, because blame is then piled on them for factors that are out of their control, number one. And number two, when it comes to the mediating partners besides the United States, namely Qatar and Egypt, have enough critical questions been asked of Qatar and Egypt for their failure, supposedly as guarantors, to be able to hold the Israelis and Americans to account at all, and piling so much disproportionate pressure on the Palestinians?
Well, that's a lot of questions, so let's try to unpack it. First of all, the resistance does not have the luxury not to negotiate, because to not negotiate, that means one of the parties would have to have a total victory, absolute victory, that they have to be able to defeat the other part. And of course, neither party has been able to defeat the other completely. And in this case, when the stronger party is unable to defeat the weaker party, then by default, that is a defeat of the stronger party. But at the end, there has to be a negotiated settlement. All wars at the end will have to end through some kind of negotiations, and there will have to be some mediators. The resistance does not, the Palestinians don't choose who the mediators are. The mediators are there as a point of fact. Hamas is in Qatar. Qatar has been trying to help Hamas to negotiate this. Qatar is not a strong country. They don't have lots of cards. They have the largest American base outside the United States, and they have some kind of a strategic relationship with the United States, even though they sympathize with the Palestinians. Egypt is on the border, and also Egypt has a lot to say about what's going on between the Palestinians outside Palestine, the Gazans outside Palestine, because it's the only gateway for the Palestinians outside. So this is reality. and you can't escape that. At the same time, we understand that they don't have a lot of cards. These are countries which do not have complete independence and sovereignty, and they have special relationship with the United States, and there's a lot of pressure on them to not only accept the Israeli and the American position, but also to try to pressure the other side. And to their credit, the resistance they haven't been able to move the resistance from the red lines from the very beginning, since the negotiations started in November 2023, within weeks of October 7th. The resistance has red lines, and they have not wavered from these red lines. Number one, that the end of this negotiation process has to be the end of the war. Number two, there has to be total withdrawal from Gaza. And number three, there has to be aid, sufficient aid for the Palestinians, and rehabilitation and reconstruction. And these are still the basis by which negotiations are taking place. And number four, there has to be an exchange of prisoners, where the majority of Palestinians under in Israeli detention camps and prisons, they have to be released, including all the ones that have life sentences. Now we have about close to 250 left, and whatever Israelis are present, male soldiers in Gaza, every single Palestinian who has life sentences, the resistance trying to free them. So you can't get them freed unless you have negotiations. But at the same time, you know what your red lines are. You may negotiate certain tactics here and there, and you can concede or you can be flexible. But at the end of the day, you're trying to get your objectives met. Now, there is a problem, because the weakness of the world, of the international system, of the Arab and Muslim countries, made it extremely difficult for the resistance, for the Palestinians, to have any sort of a guarantee that this process would end in the end of the war. And therefore, they're trying their best to try to make it much more difficult for Israel to resume the war. We see what's happening today in the battlefield against the Israeli occupation forces. They have had maybe their worst casualties in the past few weeks. We see also that they want them out of the population centers. They don't want them to occupy or partition Gaza the way it's been. That means that the Palestinians could go back north and in the middle. So for the Israelis to get back into war after 60 days, they can, certainly, but it's going to be much more difficult, because that will be the third invasion of Gaza, because they have been able to push as many Palestinians to the south as possible. Once they stop the war, once they withdraw till about a few hundred meters from the border, that means most would be able to go back to the north, and then they would have to reconquer, which will be very, very costly to them. So you could see here, negotiations is just a tactic to them. They insist on trying to achieve their objectives, but they haven't been able to achieve their objectives. This is the same way they tried in Lebanon in the 80s. They wanted to have a peace treaty with the Lebanese government. They signed one in May 83, and then they knew that this is not going to be sustainable, because the resistance made sure it wasn't sustainable. So whatever they use in terms of negotiations, if the other party stands for their principles, they won't be able to achieve it.
Professor Sami al-Arian, the Director for the Center of Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zaim University, I really thank you, appreciate your time and the insightful analysis. Shukran for your time. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much.
It's just after 9 Central African time, under the radar here on Radio Islam International. We'll be back after the break and talking about US sanctions.